Greetings. Thanks for joining me. It's Fred in Alaska. Leaves are starting to sprout in the trees. You know, sometimes we still have snow on the ground this time of year. Just a couple years ago, where I'm sitting right now, there was like 4 feet of snow still. So a little warmer this year. But anyway, thanks for joining me. What I wanted to share with you today comes from, we'll call him Vincent. He is a doctor in Anchorage, and it was really difficult for him to come forward and share because he was so just astonished and taken aback by the reality of, some of the things that happen in remote Alaska. So many years ago, a very good doctor friend of his, and he would fly with his buddy to get over his fear of heights. And his doctor friend, who had the plane, over the course of a few years kept talking about this little cabin, that he was envisioning building at this place called Moose Lake. Now, I'm not going to show it on a map, but there's several Moose Lakes, probably 1,000, depending on who you ask. Okay, so we'll just, for privacy reasons, we'll leave that aspect out of it. Now, over the course of time, over the years, his doctor friend started saying, I'm just not going to have time. I'm getting ready to be, moving out of state in a few years, and I would just hate to invest all this time and energy. Vincent, would you be interested in this property? I could take you there, and, there's already a platform. You just have to finish the build, basically. And Vincent was like, let's check it out. So a few years back, his buddy takes him out there, and immediately Vincent's like, sold. What do you want? Sold. It was a little 4-acre plot. So, he makes the arrangements, and, over the course of about 3 years, he would spend 1 week every month of the summer. So he would put in 3 weeks of work every season, basically. So, June, July, and August. So 3 years goes by. Now, one of the things Vincent noticed immediately is how quiet it would get in the evening and midday. From like midish, a little after midday, throughout the evening, dead quiet. No songbirds. Like right now, you can hear songbirds, right? So he noticed that immediately, but he wasn't a well-versed hunter. He always went well-armed, of course, because his doctor buddy told him, hey, I've seen bears in the area, be aware. There's large moose around there as well, be aware. And so he was given the lay of the land. They would fly around and stuff, so he knew the layout of the land. And so anyway, over the course of building this place, there would be strange things that would happen. He would hear weird, mournful, sorrowful, like moaning. But the moaning was so long and so drawn out and loud, he couldn't find it. He actually went searching at one point for where this sound was coming from. Now, where this particular lake laid was at the base of some smaller mountains, compared to other places, it'd be huge, but it's Alaska. So he went looking at one point and didn't find anything. He's walking along, with the 300 Win Mag, and looking around. He had a pistol on his hip. He had a 44. He was looking to go help this mournful, sorrowful person. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they were hurt. Being a doctor, he wanted to go and check it out. Couldn't find nothing. Just went back. Now, on this particular trip where he went out looking for this sound to help the person, when he got back to where he was building the cabin, he noticed things had been moved around a little bit. His cooler that had been strung up in basically his doctor friend had made this huge tripod out of pine trees, that he had flown in and made a tripod to raise your food up on, get it up off the ground and away from the critters as best as possible, because there was no real big trees to do it at, right? And so when he got there, he noticed that the cooler was on the ground, had been untied, not cut, not chewed, not ripped, untied from where it had been tied off at the base, lowered to the ground. The lid was open, and all of his meats that he had in there were gone. He said the package of hot dogs was left, which I guess, you can always account for taste, right? So as he's assessing who in the hell's here, he's looking around, and of course here in Alaska we got this spongy stuff, so it's kind of hard to make out, imprints, but he was noticing big block like footprints, and he's like, gosh, it must be a really, really big bear, so he got really concerned, and then he started assessing because he's a doctor, he's like, as he was telling me, he got real quiet, and I was like, you all right? And he goes, no, I'm still just flashing. He would have these flashbacks of how did this happen? How did a bear do this? So as he was doing the assessment in real time at the point when this happened, he got this overwhelming sense of being watched. And at this point, he was putting the roof up on the cabin. And so at the end of the day, nothing else happened. No more mournful sounds or none of that stuff. So he continues with his build, just kind of chalked it up to, well, something happened, whatever. Gets out of there, and just strange stuff like that, right? So that brings us up to last season. Now, it was the very last trip of the season, so it was last August, right? As soon as he landed and the plane took off, he was going to be there for the week. He had all his provisions, his cabin's complete, he's got a couple windows in, nice little potbelly stove, and just perfect for what he wanted, just a retreat, a place to go moose hunt, maybe find a caribou if the woodland caribou were around or whatever. So he was basically at peace for the first couple nights. He said it was quiet as hell, but it was the most peaceful he had felt in a long time. He had a lot of pressure at work and stuff, so being a doctor, I could only imagine, people dying on you, and I could just imagine. But anyway, so as he was decompressing these 2 days, he really felt invigorated. So on the third morning, he got up and he figured, this lake is a bit cold, but I'm going to try to take a swim real quick, maybe do a cold water challenge or whatever. He just dives in, immediately regrets it, gets right the hell back out, right? So he goes inside and he's shivering. He starts up the fire, and while the fire is starting to warm up, when he got the chills and stopped shaking, from the heat of the fire, he goes outside and decides, he's going to fire up the generator and just watch movies the rest of the day and just re-warm up. He didn't want to get hypothermic. And being a doctor, he's very cautious about things like that because he knows he's still got days there, and bad things could happen if he did. So he goes out, fires up this little generator, a little Honda, a little 2200, which I think this is about the fourth or fifth time someone has shared that. Honda must be making a mint off these little bastards. I might have to check one of them out. But anyway, he had a little 2200 Honda generator. He goes out and fires it up. He's got it on a little platform out back away from the house, enough to where the sound doesn't interfere with the little TV and DVD player he has, to where he watches his favorite movies and, seasons of shows or whatever. So since he was going to be inside all day doing that, he fired it up and he's got it going. Now, as the day progressed, he got warmer. He got, of course he was changed out and everything. So he goes outside for a little while, and it's getting on into dusk. And, he kept getting a creepy feeling like he was being watched. He had heard some weird noises, but again, he wasn't a woodsman, so he couldn't pinpoint what he was hearing. So he just chalked it up to a moose maybe or whatever. And as he was going inside, it was dark enough off in the distance to where he could notice that there was something dark over, not quite across the lake, but kind of, about a quarter of the way around, because it was a pretty round lake, about a quarter of the way around across from him, there was this dark object. So he goes inside and he gets his flashlight and he beams across there and he sees eye shine, right? And immediately, oh, well, that must be a moose because it seemed pretty low to the ground. So he just, okay, it was just a moose. What, no big deal, because he had seen moose in the area before. So it was like, he just chalked it up, right? Goes inside and he watches movies for a little while. And it's getting on into pretty dark. And he knows that there's only so much fuel left in the generator. So he wants to go top it off so he could fall asleep watching his movies, So he goes out, he tops it off, fires it back up, everything's fine. He's got his flashlight, he's got plenty of slack in his cable and all that. Goes back inside, and no sooner than he settles down, gets his gear off from being outside, his boots and his coat and stuff, all of a sudden, power goes out. And he's like, what the hell? That is weird. And he goes, I just topped it off. I wonder if it had an air, little pocket of air in the line. So I'm going to go out, bleed the system real quick. No harm, no foul. Fire it back up. So he goes out. And the first thing he notices when he comes around the back corner of his cabin, because this is only a 10 by 12 little cabin. You know what I mean? It was 2x6 construction, plywood sided, insulated. He didn't have any drywall. It was just vapor barrier on the inside at this point. Now, when he goes out and goes around the corner, he just looking at the trail, and first thing he wanted to do is check to make sure the plug didn't fall out. But he noticed the line was taut, and it was slack just a little bit ago. So what he does is he's like, well, that was weird. Maybe my platform vibrated, because this is what's going on in his head at the time. Vincent was very methodical when he was sharing this stuff. A very detail-oriented guy, which it makes it a lot easier for me. So he just figured the little platform he built for the thing, he just used old dunnage underneath, and he figured it vibrated, the little generator vibrated, and the little thing collapsed, pulled away, right? I mean, makes sense. So he goes back over there, and he notices there's no generator, none. And so he's like, what the? I mean, immediately hair stands up on the back of his neck. He's feeling watch. He's looking around. He's doing this kind of like 180, just going around, looking around the immediate area. He doesn't notice anything, and then he moves his flashlight up. Now, where his little generator set was just a little bit around the corner of this little, I call them islands of black spruce. There was about 5 or 6 black spruce all in a little group, and he kind of had the platform just around to where it pushes the sound out away from the cabin. And so he kind of looks up. Now, this is 15 feet away. He looks up and beams into that little cluster of trees. Now, from where he was just around a little corner, he's almost facing back towards his cabin, okay? And when he beams and looks, there's eye shine. He said the eye shine was roughly about a foot apart. This thing was towering next almost to the tops of these trees, and he estimated those trees to be at least 12 foot tall. And this eye shine was right there, and this thing gruffed. Ooh. Let out this low, bellowing growl. He said he felt it in the ground and in his chest. He was out there without his gun. He was just out there to fix the generator. So immediately he kind of hunkers down and is trying to figure out what the hell is going on here, because he said he was in shock instantly. He just couldn't accept what was going on. It wasn't making sense in his mind, right? And so he said as he was sitting there just kind of stuck and flabbergasted, he found himself whirling around, and he said he didn't even realize he was running until he was inside the cabin, right? So his fight or flight kicked in, and while he's trying to assess what's going on, his body said, screw you, we're out of here, right? Because he was gone. He doesn't remember going from staring at this thing to being inside. That from that point to inside was all a blur. He still doesn't know. He remembers a weird noise, kind of like he chalked it up to maybe a scream, but he was so panic stricken, it was all a blur, right? So he gets inside, he slams the door, he's doing everything he can. It's dark inside, right? All he has is this flashlight. So once he's got the door shut, he had already built a little it looks like a gun rack but you hang a board to keep, anyway. So he puts that up there, and is basically his locking system in case a bear was trying to enter at some point. So he said he was on the floor shaking, trying to what the hell. And he said he gathered up his guns. The generator was gone, right? So he doesn't know what the hell to do. He's sitting there squirming around on the floor a little ways. He said he's not sure how much time had passed, but just as he was kind of pulling himself together, all of a sudden, wham! The whole place just shakes, and he was like, whoa. The back side of the wall, because that's where whatever hit he turned and pointed, and the wall was kind of pushed in a little bit, and it kind of had a weird shape to it. It was kind of like the corner of a box kind of look to it, because it was pushed in really good. And he was just in shock. He was like, what the hell? So he ended up staying up all night, not being able to sleep because of what's going on, right? Wee hours of the morning when it's light out, it's quiet. He's looking out the windows. He doesn't see anything. He's got his gun, so he's going to go and inspect. His curiosity is getting him. He's freaked out. He doesn't know what this freaking huge thing was behind the tree. He goes out behind the cabin there, and there's the little Honda generator just smashed. This thing had thrown the generator into the back wall of the cabin so hard, it basically left a huge impression of the generator in the back wall. It didn't compromise the building, but it cracked some of the studs. I build homes. I trust me, there's certain forces involved, for them to get their rating and whatnot. And for that impact, you're talking about a lot of force, well over 3,000 foot-pounds or better, especially with it being skinned. That's an impact. And the generator, of course, is cooked. It is cooked. So once he sees that, he's immediately like, crap, I got like 3 more whole days before hopefully the weather's good and the plane makes it back to get me. So he's assessing. He goes back inside, and he is literally petrified to go outside. This thing growled at him through the generator at his cabin, and so he's inside, and being a doctor, he's trying to logic everything out. He said he sat there and argued with himself, and we had a little chuckle about it because I understand that self-argument, but so as he was going through trying to what the hell is this shit, as he's doing that, one of the windows drapes was open behind him, and so he was facing a small table, and he was looking at a map. For whatever reason, he was trying to figure out, if I have to leave on foot sooner, is there a route, basically. So he was going over so many different scenarios. He was just panicked. And he said as he was looking at this map, he's using the natural daylight of the open window behind him, and all of a sudden it gets dark. So he was like, what the hell? He turns around, and this thing is quasi leaning down, looking in the window at him. Freaked him the hell out, man. He immediately grabbed the pistol off the table, turned around, and started firing through his own window. And this thing was gone. He fired through the window as it was moving out of the way of the window, and he's freaking out. He doesn't know what to do, which I totally understand. So what he ends up doing is backing up into the farthest corner, bringing foodstuffs and everything, and just sat there, got a hold of the rifle, lit the stove, wanted to keep the stove going. He thought maybe the smoke coming out of the chimney, would drive it away. He was spitballing. He didn't really have any idea of whether it would work or not. It's just smoke coming out of a stack. You know what I mean? But in that moment, he was so freaked out, he was reaching for anything. He had gotten his bear spray out. So he said he was basically sat back into the corner, rifle across his lap, pistol on top of that, and he had food items. A little luggable loo for toilet facilities, right? Over here off to his left. And he had food supplies and, just various things, flashlights and what have you. And he said he sat there and was petrified for at least a day and a half. He said it was about midday when he came out of his panicked fright, his fog, as he called it. He said it was severe brain fog. He comes out of it and decides, you know what, I gotta make sure I'm okay. I'm gonna make a stand. I got a rifle, I got a pistol. I gotta make sure I stand my ground with whatever this is. Otherwise, I'm done. So as he goes out the door, he said he would take a step and then kind of half step back, a step and a half step back, because he's panic stricken. He said he wasn't right. He shouldn't have been carrying guns at that point, but he had to defend himself. But he was assessing himself as you're in a panic state. You're probably a liability to yourself, And so he goes outside and he goes around that little trail he had, packed down over the last few years to where, the generator stuff is, because that's basically where it opens up and he can see a little further. He gets around back there and he's kind of peeking around the corner, and across the lake. And this lake is probably, he guesstimates about half-mile long. It's almost a big circle. He said it had also been referred to as like a frying pan lake and moose lake and whatever lake. I mean, people have their own names for these lakes up here. But anyway, so as he's looking around, the scream comes from way across the lake. And immediately, he said he damn near went fetal position because he was hyperventilating. He was just not doing good. So he pulls himself together and realized, I need to get back inside. This thing is still mad about whatever. I need to get back inside before it gets over here. So he goes back inside. Now, remember, this is midday. So he gets inside and he's got both drapes open on. He had opposing windows, one on one side, one on the other. One was larger, and the one he shot through was a little smaller. And so as he was sitting there, he realized, well, that window's compromised. I need to do something about that window. And he knew just outside the door he had some plywood and stuff that he would put onto the outside. And so he figures, okay, you know what I'll do? I'm gonna grab the board that belongs on the outside to keep bears out. I'm gonna go and attach it while I still can, while it's daylight and it's open view and I can, I know it's way over there. So immediately he just grabs his pistol, puts it in the holster, and goes out the door and gets this board, goes around, and as he's attaching it, he just gets done attaching it, and a wet clump of grassy stuff from the edge of the lake just smacks, and hits so hard it kind of sticks there for a minute before gravity just slowly, and the weight of it just kind of falls to his feet. And so he turns around and looks, and off to his right in some brush, just about, he said it was about 100 yards away, and the thing was standing there behind some brush looking at him. And it was almost like he couldn't make out facial features at that distance. He could just tell it was staring a hole through him, right? And he was thankful that he had gotten that board up, and he ran back inside, and now that window is the only one that was facing that direction. So now he has no eyes on this thing when he gets back inside. And, he said he regretted putting the board up just momentarily until a moment later. He said it seemed like his focus was at the door and that where he put that board up to see if anything else was going to hit it. And the window behind him, it got dark again. And immediately he said his blood went cold. And he slowly turned around because he had just set the pistol down. He had no guns in his hand, and the guns were actually right near the base of this window on this little table. So when he turns around and looks, there's this thing again, but it's so silhouetted and dark, he can't make out any facial features. It's just there, and he said he felt like he was being studied, like he was behind a little aquarium glass and someone was visiting the zoo. Those are his words. And he said this thing stood there, and he could slightly see movement of the face every once in a while, but he was in shock looking at this thing. And, I asked him, I was like, well, is there anything defining a color or anything? And he said, no, it was all dark. It was a silhouette. And he said a couple times when it moved, he caught a little glint of eye shine from just the daylight, but not like a glowing eye shine like, with a flashlight, but just a glint of light off the eye. And, that's the best description he could give. And he said he stood there, and that thing just would go from peeking in to moving fully in front to peeking in from the other side, and just kind of, he said it looked like it was examining the inside of the cabin, and he was just happened to be there. That's how he felt. He felt like this thing sweated him not, and it was just more like, oh, what's this little hairless thing building, and just kind of doing that number and going from side to side of this window. He said he doesn't know how long it did that. He said he sat down Indian style, and at one point when it was moving across, he leaned forward, grabbed his rifle, slid it over, and just had it near him. And he said the sheer size of this thing, because the window was a 4 foot wide, and I think he said it was 5 foot tall. And so this thing, when it would go in front of the window, it would eclipse it. Like, so it was at least 4 foot wide, and he's being, the school guy, he's assessing like the mass and all this stuff, right? And he's sitting here in shock doing all this, just trying to wrap his mind around it, right? And he was like, no way do I want to use this rifle either. So again, he doesn't remember how long it went on, but it continued for a while, and then it moved out of sight, and then it got, it was just still. It was quiet. He said he sat there probably an hour after it had finally moved away, went and looked out the window, saw nothing, sat there the rest of the night, scooted over beside the Potbelly stove, because the stove was between him and that broken window, and the other window was across from him, and his little counter and where his little armchair was and the table with his DVD player and little TV and stuff was all right there. And he said he sat there throughout the rest of that day until the next day. And once it was about mid-morning, he said he finally, he had to get out, breathe some air, and look around. And he said it was the hardest steps he ever took to unlatch that door and go out. He said he was having freakouts, panic attacks. Like, he would go back in, slam the door. He said it took about 5 or 6 times to get out onto the little landing of a porch he had and just kind of look around and breathe a little bit. And then he immediately went back inside. So the following day, he heard the buzz of the plane, because his buddy would come early in the morning, hang out, fish for some trout in the lake or whatever, hang out, just BS for a little bit before they would take off, close to, give themselves enough time to fly out of there before it gets dark, right? So he hears the buzz of the plane, and he knows his friend's coming. So he grabs his important stuff, nothing else, just his important stuff, rifle, pistol, put on his little rain jacket because it was sprinkling, but it wasn't socked in, so he knew his friend could land, right? His friend lands. He's immediately out there to meet him on the little floating dock, because that was his last trip there. Normally they pulled a little floating dock out together, and so it doesn't freeze into the pond and get all screwed up. But he said, when his friend landed and got to the little dock and was all cheerful, hey buddy, yeah, he was like, let's go, excuse me. His friend immediately saw his face and was like, are you okay? And being a doctor, he's examining him, because he was so pale. He thought he had injured himself. And so he's trying to assess his buddy. And meanwhile, Vincent said he was climbing over his friend to get into the plane, right? And I only laughed because he laughed. I'm not trying to disrespect the sheer terror of that. So he says he's literally pushing his friend out of the way, almost pushed him into the water, saying, get the hell out of my way, let's go. So his friend just, obviously something's going on. His friend, he said, stood there, looked around, nothing was happening, kind of shook his head and just pushed off and fired up, and they took off, and he told his friend about it on the flight back to Anchorage. His friend initially kind of chuckled, like, what? Like, and asked him, like, concerned, like, were you eating mushrooms or something? Yeah, like, and it, Vincent was like, look, this is what happened, and went back through it again. And his friend realized, hey, my friend is not, just jerking me around. He's being sincere. Told him about the, the generator, the eye shine, this thing peeking in and all that, right? His friend feels horrible because he sold him the property, but he had never had a chance to really hang out there. That's why he sold it, because he wasn't making use of it, and he was getting ready to leave state. So, it was one of those things to where he shared with his friend, his doctor buddy ended up leaving or whatever not too long after that. But so Vincent went down the rabbit hole, as a lot of people do, about these creatures, and stumbled across my website somehow, going through the rabbit hole or whatever, and then saw it was all Alaskan based, and reached out and shared. And I want to thank Vincent. He almost didn't, because of his profession. I assured him, hey dude, I won't give any information that'll jeopardize your career, but I really appreciate you sharing, Vincent. Especially being in the position you are, you know, being a doctor, it's one of those things that's inexplicable. You can't explain it. You know, it's so random in nature. You know, he's not sure what he's gonna do as far as the property's concerned. He has no interest in it at this moment. He said he'd get a hold of me if that changes, and you know, maybe go out there with him sometime. That's definitely a possibility. But I want to thank you, Vincent, for sharing that. I know it was a back and forth on that. You know, one minute he'd be laughing about a certain scenario, and then the next minute he was on the verge of tears. You know, so it's very traumatic for these people who go through this. And it's one thing to share the encounter. It's another thing. There's humanity behind it. These are people. I mean, these are people. Some of them are regularly in the comments and stuff, but people are affected by this stuff, and not in a good way. You know what I mean? Grant you, this thing sounded overall curious. Maybe was upset by the noise of the generator. We could speculate on that shit all day. However, the fact is this thing actively was accosting him. It was actively looking in on him. It was actively threw shit at him through the. I mean, dude. Anyway, thank you, Vincent. Thank you for sharing. These songbirds, land of the midnight sun. You hear these little bastards all night long, I tell you what. Anyway, thank you guys for joining me. There's some major excursions coming up here in the very near future, and we'll catch you guys soon. Thanks.